So we'll start. Hey, everybody, welcome. This is Jeffrey Weiss. I'm with the Disaster Preparedness Network. Welcome to our second interview. And if you notice today, I'm wearing purple. I'm wearing purple because our guest is not red and not blue. She claims to be independently purple, right?
That's right.
Why don't you introduce yourself to our audience here?
Sure, Jeff. Hi, everyone. My name is Reinette Senum, and I am a former two-time mayor and vice mayor and councilwoman from Nevada City, California, Northern California. It's my hometown since I was 4 years old. And speaking of resiliency and, being able to survive, for the last almost 20 years, I've been focused on my hometown regarding self-reliance and resiliency. And I'm now, of course, running for governor of California with no party affiliation. I've been watching the political landscape for quite some time, and we're really lacking some leadership, and we're not prepared for the future whatsoever. So I'm just bumping up my game, going from the micro to the macro. And I'm actually very excited about jumping into this because I think there's a lot of things that we can be doing in California that's not that difficult. And the only thing we're really lacking right now is leadership. And so just quickly, the reason why I'm running with no party affiliation is I've been mostly declined to state no party affiliation for almost a decade now, actually for a decade now. And after the 2010 Supreme Court decision, known as Citizens United versus the FEC, the federal, Federal Elections Commission, excuse me, there was a decision made that basically allowed big corporate donors to put money into our elections. And they see that as a First Amendment right for corporations. And ever since then, our politics have been completely owned by corporations. So I'm not here to be a Democrat or Republican. I'm here to be a Californian and to serve the people, not a party. And as I like to say, the many and not the money. So thank you for this time. I'm really looking forward to this interview.
That's great. So where do you get your money from? Obviously it
all,
costs money to run.
It costs money to run. I grassroots. I'm completely grassroots. I don't have any PAC money behind me. I don't have any big corporate donors behind me. I have individuals who are personally just throwing money in, and no NGOs or nonprofits or anything like that. And so I'm as grassroots as you possibly can get.
Very, very cool. So we are here to talk about disaster preparedness. California has had its share of disaster preparedness, all kinds of different disasters that California goes through. And so I want to talk about, different how you're going to maybe combat it. Right now, we are in the midst of one of the worst pandemics this nation has ever gone through, and California has fronted some of the biggest of it because we have one of the most population and one of the bigger states in this country. So we've impacted a lot. There's been over 300,000 Californians who have died from the pandemic, and there's all kinds of different. So this is one kind of disaster, the pandemic disaster. This is not going to be our first disaster. How are you going to get us out of this? Work us through the pandemic, and then prepare for the next pandemic?
Well, first and foremost, you have to look at the data. And one of the things that we were not allowed to do, and I myself included, I've actually put in what's called public records requests to our county health departments for vital statistics. I'm one of thousands of Californians who have done this to different county public health departments across the state. And it's actually illegal not to respond and give the information that does belong to the public. So the reason why we need to look at that data is, in the questions that I was asking the public health department, is what are the ages of those who are dying? Where are they dying mostly, right? What are comorbidities, right? Are they in nursing homes? Are there other factors we need to include? And the reason why we need to look at that is so that we can adjust ourselves accordingly. And for the first time ever, public records requests have been completely denied, which makes you have to ask the question, why? Why would our health departments and our county and city officials not want to show us the data? My assumption at this point in time, that's all I can go off of, is the fact that the data does not back up and support the actual official narrative. So we need to look at the data. We're not allowed to look at the data. That's the first thing. The second thing is this, is that once we look at that data, then we actually target who it is that we need to protect. Now, we did have, Jeff, just to let you know, we had one individual in October of 2020 who did get some of that information released, right? And as soon as she did, she began to share it, because what she discovered was the deaths that we had, and there weren't that many, but we had some, the deaths were 100% in nursing homes.
Okay.
And right, so right there's like, okay, we need to target nursing homes. But as soon as this individual began to release that information and did not back up the official narrative, they literally got a cease and desist letter from the county saying, shut up and don't share this information any longer.
Hmm.
Now, you only do that when you want to hide something, right? So right there's a little bit of suspicion. So we have to look at the data. We have to see who it is that we need to protect. From what I have gathered, even at this point in time, the most vulnerable still to this day are the individuals, the elders in the nursing homes. So we need to target them. The next thing is early treatment. When this all began, and I was just gobsmacked by this, when this all began in the beginning, we were told by our hospitals and our county health department that if you have COVID and you're really, really sick, don't come to the hospital until you're about 4 days away from dying. Well, first of all, how do you know if you're 4 days away from dying? And why in the world would you wait until it was that, that far along and that extreme? And we know for a fact, the doctors, the medical practitioners who have been successful in treatment know, and they tell you first and foremost, early treatment. As soon as you get sick, treat it. Don't wait and wait and wait until it's so deeply in your lungs that you have to be intubated. Treat it out early. So that's the other thing.
Okay.
The other thing I would do if I were the governor is, and I'm shocked he didn't do this, is I would have been putting up together task force up and down the state to identify again, who are those who are falling ill the most, who are those with the highest mortality rate. And then what we do is we actually do a lot of cross-pollinating of best practices, of best policies. And we'd share that information every single week, but we weren't allowed to do that. And instead, we had Newsom every single day from Monday to Friday from 12 to 1 o'clock have his press conferences and scared the bejesus out of everybody rather than calming them down and keeping people in fear, keeping people anxiety ridden. Isolating people is the worst thing for your health. So we should have had a massive cross-pollination, did not happen. The next thing is what was never a part of the conversation was the importance of boosting up your immunity. Right? How do you do that? Vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin A, zinc tablets. We should have been distributing that all across the state of California for those who requested or just send it in the mail. We weren't doing that. The other thing that's important is we have to talk about the importance of going out into the sunshine and getting vitamin D, healthy eating, that food is medicine, right? Eating a bunch of chemical foods, which I call just eating chemistry, is not going to boost your immune system. Eating
Right.
healthy food is, but we never had that discussion either. So it's really a multi-pronged approach of targeting the most vulnerable, right? And not just doing not just casting a broad net and just making everyone have to completely change their lives and turn their lives upside down, targeting those who are most vulnerable, cross-pollinating, making sure we're sharing the best practices and policies, early treatment, boosting our immune system, and letting people go back to life while we protect those who are most vulnerable.
Right. That's very important. I appreciate that answer.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing you mentioned, feeding and health and all this, one thing we need to do is take care of ourselves. And this nation and a lot of people in the state are very, very obese, and obesity is a big problem. How are you going to combat nutrition, the lack of nutrition, and the I call it the McDonald factor, which is we just keep funneling McDonald Big Macs down our throats and drinking sodas?
Well, I think McDonald's and the soda companies are actually greatly responsible for the obesity, right? Most of the people I know who are obese go consume a lot of colas and sodas, and they consume a lot of McDonald's and fast food. So I think at the very least we should be not taxing them, but we should be taking a lot of their profits and putting it back into public education campaigns where we educate people about what your diet is and what the impacts are. But one of the big pieces of my whole entire campaign is about building an economy based upon restoration and healing. And that actually not only involves healing of our own bodies and our, boosting our immune system, but it's also about intergenerational connections. Because one of the best things we can do is actually have social connections. It's very healthy for us.
Yeah.
And what people don't realize, and this is kind of interesting little factoid, is that in the 60s and 70s, cities and towns around America lost their town squares to the highways. The highways came into the center of towns and cities and got rid of their town squares. Well, that's an important part of a healthy community. That's the nexus of where we come together and say, John's having a barn raising, let's help him tomorrow. And Betty Sue's sick, can someone make her lunch? And we lost that, okay? Well, that's the best thing we can do. And the intergenerational connection is very important for the old and for the young. So we can't go out there and put town squares everywhere or take too much time. But
Yeah.
one of the things that we can do is we can actually have community gardens everywhere, in front yards, in blighted, urban areas, on the little strips of sidewalks, right? And the reason why I say this is so important is a couple different things. One is it just naturally builds community. When you're out there in your front yard and you have a produce garden going, or you have a little strip in front of your sidewalk, or even on your balcony hanging over, right, the balcony edge, you begin to meet people. They come up and they want to have a conversation and they want to ask what you're doing. And a community garden is a really great way to bring all the different generations in. If you have a community garden, then what you're doing is you're no longer talking about politics and what divides us, but you're actually focusing on the seeds, planting them, tending to them, right? Harvesting them, and then actually enjoying the bounty of your labor, and communing and breaking bread over a little table with everybody. And this is healthy on so many. It's healthy psychologically, emotionally. If we also build up our topsoils, which I'm also very big in building the topsoil, you're now producing nutritionally dense foods, because our food is not nearly as nutritionally dense as it used to be in the past.
Yes.
And so all these incredible positive impacts. And so when you talk about, getting people who are no longer obese, part of that's just coming together and eating healthy, and then having a massive public outreach campaign.
Yes.
Look, you need to go out there and you need to exercise. Right now, children aren't outside anymore. Since 1985, those who were born 85 and on have spent more time indoors than outdoors. That was the first time ever in the history of humanity. We need to get kids back outside. We need to get them engaged in nature, running around, falling down, bruising their knees, getting back up again, right? And being active, because right now they're in front of the screens, and that's the worst thing you can do for a child on a multitude of levels. It's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah. So that brings me to another point. In some parts of our country, we are poisoning our soils. There are places in this country where the cities put out and states put out signs that says kids don't play in the dirt, because they know the dirt is contaminated by corporations who have come in and contaminated our soil, and our kids can't play in the dirt like they should be.
Well, and the thing is that there's a difference between dirt and soil. Soil is alive, it's moist, and it's alive, and has tons of microbiomes and worms and insects and things like that, and pollinators even in them, and hibernating and stuff. And dirt is dead. And so if they're playing in dirt, it's probably been sprayed with chemicals over and over again, and it's just killed all the life within it. So kids probably should not play in dirt, but they should be playing in soil. And we can do everything in our power. And again, this is all about rebuilding the topsoil, because we only have 64 harvests left of topsoil on the planet after having billions of years of topsoil. And so this is really much about rebuilding our topsoil, because not only does it create nutritionally dense food, right? And it's healthy for the kids. It's actually good for your psychological welfare. Getting your hands, they've have studies on this. Getting your hands in healthy living soil is really healthy for you psychologically and emotionally. But the other thing is too, what people don't realize is here we are in a drought in California. Well, that's because we have rainwater hitting dirt and it just rolls off into the waterways into the Pacific Ocean. But if we have healthy soil is a sponge. And within a matter of like 30 to 45 seconds, that water goes right into the soil and into the aquifers, absolutely, replenishing them. So there's that piece. And the other people don't realize with soil is not only is it good for children and adults to play in, but also changes the weather. It brings in the rain, right? It's really good for pollinators. Having healthy soil around your homes or your buildings also reduces the velocity of catastrophic fires. The benefits to rebuilding our topsoil, it cures about 80% of our environmental issues.
Mm-hmm.
Topsoil is everything. And so again, this is another big key factor, is we want to see topsoil regeneration all across the state of California. And that's the soil, not the dirt, but that's the soil that the children should be playing in.
Very good. So another subject that is very important, California, we have our forest fire. We have our fires. We're entering into fire season. We're in fire season. I work with the Red Cross a lot and with CERT, and we respond to fires, and billions of dollars are lost every year. So besides raking the forest, what is your? I mean, we need a really positive plan, because we have a problem with utility companies coming in and causing big forest fires and killing people and destroying towns. We have irresponsible people who cause fires. We have all different causes we have natural things that cause fire. So we need a new plan. We need somebody who's going to come in and rejuvenate our local and county fire departments and come up with a plan to help us combat these fires that kill and cost billions of dollars a year. How are you going to do that?
Well, first and foremost, the electric companies need to go away. They need to be broken up. And we need to decentralize our electrical grid, actually, and bring it back to the people. And that could be through a joint powers authority, right? And the reason why we need that is because right now, as it currently stands with Pacific Gas and Electric and Southern Edison, all that money that should be going back into actually hardening our lines and making sure that the infrastructure is safe and sound is actually going to the shareholders' pockets instead. And that's actually costing lives. It's destroying communities. It's destroying forests. It's destroying wildlife. So they need to be broken up. How we've allowed these monopolies to rule our lives, those power companies are essentially nothing short of being, I would consider terrorist organizations. And I wish I was kidding, but I've had firsthand experience with them and they're horrific. They're out of control. So we need to absolutely kind of rein them in, all right? The next thing is this, is that unfortunately, fire suppression is far more lucrative than fire prevention, right? Once the fire started, we just throw hundreds of millions of dollars trying to get the fires out rather than investing in the prevention. Now, when it comes to the prevention, Newsom has absolutely betrayed the California citizens because he has said, I've spent hundreds of millions of dollars. And we come to find out from NPR in Sacramento that no, as a matter of fact, they did not spend hundreds of millions of dollars. The money just disappeared and our forests never got restored. I would like to see our electeds and our officials and our leaders in the state of California create what's called a shoot for the moon. And what I mean by that is I want them to go out there and create an audacious goal. Like, okay, you guys, in the first year, this is how many acres of forest we're going to restore. And in the next 4 years, this is how many hundreds of millions of acres we're going to restore. And what we're going to do is we're going to expand the California Conservation Corps. We're going to actually include a lot of the indigenous stewardship like cultural burns and so on, because they're much better at actually taking care of the forest than the Bureau of Land Management, the federal forests, right? The US forests, they've failed. They've completely failed the responsibility. And the beautiful thing is, Jeff, is that we don't have to sit there and reinvent the wheel. There's incredible models out there around the world. One of them is actually called the Rio Grande Water Fund. And the Rio Grande Water Fund in New Mexico is actually where in 2011, they had catastrophic fires up in the headwaters of the Rio Grande. And what happened is they had the catastrophic fires and then they had catastrophic rains. And when that happened, all this mud and debris went down into the Rio Grande and choked off the Rio Grande for 40 days. Industries could not operate. Water treatment plants for cities could not function. It cost hundreds of millions of dollars in damage and lost business. So what they did is they created a water fund. And what they did is through different kind of satellite imagery where they would identify the humidity of the forest, the steepness, right, the terrain, how much ladder fuels they had. And they actually identified the most vulnerable in the upper watersheds and the headwaters. And then what they did is they actually went down to the downriver businesses, industries, and cities and so on and said, look, we want you to invest this many thousands of dollars into this program. And what we're going to do is we're going to go from actually restoring 3,000 acres to restoring a year to 30,000 acres a year, so that when we do have fires, they're the healthy fires, not the catastrophic fires. And so they went within a matter of just a few years, they did go from 3,000 to 30,000 acres a year, which is now even going beyond that. And it is saving them hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in money and catastrophe. So Jeff, the only reason why this is not happening is because of our leadership or the lack thereof. And we have a lot of elected officials right now who are making a lot of money from the disaster capitalism. And that's what this is. It's disaster capitalism. From the fires to the homeless, right? Somebody is making a lot of money off the backs of people who are suffering and the forest that is suffering. And I think they should be called out.
Okay. Well, that is one answer. And I think you're right. I think the utilities need to change. I don't, and I think we need to do some stuff. Recently in the news, we've had a terrorist in Buffalo killed 10 Black people and some white people, and in California we had an Asian kill a Chinese, committed an act of violence against a Taiwanese person, and terrorists incidences are super high. America has some of the highest rates of terrorist attacks than any other country in the world, and plus we have big horrible things like January 6th, where terrorists attacked our capital. How are you going to protect citizens from terrorists like the guy in Buffalo and the guy in Northern California who committed these horrible acts, and terrorists who are not necessarily Hajid terrorists, but homegrown terrorists? How are you going to protect us against those? Because that is another kind of disaster.
I mean, I think I have to ask the question, how is it that we can have surveillance cameras everywhere? We're tracking everyone's phones left and right. We know who's with who, right? We are able to identify people that are coming together and doing things they shouldn't be doing. We have the ability to surveil every American out there, right? And yet these terrorist acts continue to happen. I've actually pointed out, I have on my personal blog called thefoghornexpress.com, I wrote a piece called The Theater of War Comes Home. And I've said to people that ever since the end of the Smith-Mundt Act, which was in, I think, 2010 or 12, it was through the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, that the Smith-Mundt Act was basically repealed. That actually made it illegal for the US government to propagandize against Americans on American soil. And that also meant psychological warfare. You could always do it to Americans on foreign soil, but not American soil. And interestingly enough, ever since then, you just started to see this creep in these school shootings and these type of, horrific shootings. And we have to really look at, like, why is that happening? Why was there this uptick in shootings, and how the story is being spun? And so I just think that we need to really start looking at, and at the track record of our own government. I mean, I think we need to look at the CIA, right? I think we need to look at, the fact that there is a movement to use these type of, whether they're real or not, or it's an individual lone wolf or not. Generally, these are used to restrict our freedoms and our right to privacy. And so I'm just questioning how these narratives are spun and who these individuals are. And how is it that every time we see a person pop up saying, oh, this is the person, but we never really get to the bottom of it.
Right.
Was it psychological? Was it medications? Was it drug abuse? We never ever hear the rest of the story. It just comes up, it's big on the headlines, and then they disappear. And here comes the next one, and here comes the next one. And we never seem to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
But what it is used to, it's used to take away our freedoms and to justify more surveillance and monitoring. And so how is it that we can be so surveilled and so monitored, and we can't figure this out? As it currently stands, the powers that be, they know exactly where we are and what we're doing all the time. And we can't track these people down before they commit these crimes. We can't track them down and who were they and how they were doing it afterwards. It just blows my mind.
Okay. So another thing that is taxing our state, and it also refers to disaster preparedness, is the people who protect us. We've had all this cries for either defund the police, reform the police, support the police. What are you going to do? And also the sheriffs, and the police also includes the sheriff's departments and other law enforcement, not just the police departments. So how are you going to? What do you want to do? Reform, defund? What is your term? And what is your plan for either supporting or changing the way that we do law enforcement?
Well, first and foremost, I have almost a 20-year history of calling out corruption at every level, whether it's the telecoms, PG&E, California Public Utility Commission, our governor, or even my own former city legal counsel is directly across the street from me, which made things a little difficult in the neighborhood. I've been calling out corruption. I was calling it out also in law enforcement. In fact, in 2016, I was calling out, the violence on the part of law enforcement. And again, I'm not anti-law. I'm not anti-police. As a council member and a mayor, I've been working and partnering with the police department for years. And I continued to partner with them even after I called them out on Facebook. But my point was this, is that right now, and I was told when I got into politics, perception is everything. And right now, the perception of law enforcement is not good. A lot of that is due to social media, and a lot of things are taken out of context. But there is a relationship crisis with law enforcement and the public, and we really need to work on that. So when people ask me, well, what are you going to do? Or they also think that they just assume that I'm all about defunding the police. I'm not about defunding the police. Do they get plenty of money right now? Yes, they do. Do I believe the militarization of police? Absolutely not. It's against posse comitatus. We should not be doing it. That is a dangerous sidestep, right? So I don't support the militarization of police, but what we do need to do is at least consider these steps: mandatory malpractice insurance. We also need police union accountability. They have a lot of power, but they don't have a lot of accountability. And we need to have mandatory body and dash cams. We don't really have that mandatory right now in a lot of different cities and counties.
Yes.
And the other thing too, which is a big one for me, is the de-escalation training, right?
Yes.
We've got to train, they need more training. And this is something called back in 2016. And I was shot down saying, oh, they have plenty of training. Well, obviously they don't, because they're not de-escalating. And the problem is because of social media, it's imperative that law enforcement be more astute and make sure that they rein in those who are actually out of control and are getting on social media and creating this really bad reputation around law enforcement. The other thing is too, which is it's kind of hit and miss. You can't do it everywhere, but it's really good to try to have as many of the law enforcement officers living in or near the area that they serve, so that we know them.
I agree.
And they know us by name, right?
Yeah.
We also need what's called community-oriented policing. This is something that became quite well known well over a decade ago. So it's really more like, coffee with a cop. Our former police chief, Tim Foley, used to do that. He used to have coffee with a cop, like on Tuesday mornings, and you could sit down and talk to him some of the issues, and you get to know each other personally, which is one of the best things we could do. So then we're also participating in law enforcement itself. The other thing is that instead of, having to have officers resort to their guns, they have all these other devices. They have tasers, they have clubs, they have this, they have that. There's other things they can use before they resort to the gun. One of the things that we could do too is actually utilize the tracking canine units even more. So rather than shooting somebody and as they're running away, you release a dog and they can go and take them down and tackle them. That's something we can also look at doing. And then the other thing is we need to really financially incentivize agility. A lot of these officers aren't that healthy these days. They get hired, and then they just get more and more overweight. And it'd be really good for them just to be agile enough where they are having to pursue somebody, they don't have to resort to shooting them. They can actually catch them and tackle them. And then the other thing is much stronger mental background checks, right? And vetting before we even hire these individuals. Many times they'll move from one law enforcement area to another in another county or city, another agency, and they're not really doing the proper vetting. So there's a lot of things that we can do. And I just feel at this point in time, the biggest thing is the education, the hiring, the community relations, right? And I don't believe in bumping up their budgets any more than they are. In my own little town in Nevada City, almost half of our budget was allocated to the police department, and we're a little town, so that's gotten out of control. I just really feel like the community relationships is really, really key here.
Okay, well, thank you so much on that. One of the last questions I want to ask you is, homelessness is a huge problem in our thing. When a disaster happens and the city is displaced, we have resources for people who live in homes or apartments and stuff like that, but we don't have a lot of resources to support our homeless population. How do we support them during a disaster? How are you going to get services to these people and help these people? And then when a disaster happens, we will suddenly have a lot more homeless people, because when homes collapse, when apartments collapse or apartments burn down, those people are homeless. And the Red Cross, which I work with a lot, comes out and shelters people, but we can only do so much. How are you going to combat the homeless population, the homeless pandemic, and the fact that we will have a lot more homeless when disasters happen?
Well, first and foremost, we need to declare a state of emergency. So when governor, I declare a state of emergency around the homeless issue, the houseless issue. The next thing I would do is I would immediately loosen up the building codes. We have a lot of commercial buildings right now that are absolutely empty because of the pandemic. And I would actually loosen up the building code so we can actually retrofit them to be mental health facilities, which we're short on, and also rehabilitation centers, which we're short on, as well as low income housing. As soon as that is underway, at the same time, we also go out there and we connect with the continuum of care committees that are all throughout counties in California, and the different housing sectors and the homeless shelters, and actually get their data as well to identify those who are at most risk on the streets, to themselves, to the neighbors, to the businesses. These are the ones who have mental health issues, who are addicted, alcohol or drugs. And what we do is we then get them off the streets, because this is really about ensuring that they're reducing the risk to themselves and everyone around them.
Right.
Once we get them off the streets, then they get their wraparound services and we target whatever treatments they need. Also, at the same time, we go out there and we identify those who are just down on their luck, who are living in their RV, in their car, lost their apartment or home, lost their job. And what we do is we get them into the low housing, right? The low income housing that we have, which we've developed, right, by loosening up some of these building codes and just being as quick as possible. And what we do is we help them reskill. We identify what the skills that they want to undertake, what they want to do, what kind of jobs they want to acquire, and we help them get the skills they need, as well as then we help them with a job placement. Now, granted, if we're building an economy on restoration and healing, that's a lot of rebuilding the topsoil, expanding regenerative farming, right? The legacy farms and ranches, forest restoration, watershed restoration. There's a lot of people that we can actually get into these different types of fields of work and get them trained and up and running in no time whatsoever. So the only reason why, again, and here we go, Newsom once again has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on the homeless situation, and we've not seen any of it, for the most part, transpire on the streets themselves. And here we are, once again, someone's making a lot of money off of this. This is more disaster capitalism. And I have people saying, well, what about the individuals who don't want to leave the streets? Well, basically, as it currently stands, the laws are such that if you do not have a place to provide them, you can't remove them off the streets. But
Right.
there is a really beautiful model, once again. We have tons of models around the country. Outside of San Antonio, Texas, there's a place called Haven for Hope, and they have 22 acres. And in the center of the acres, they have this incredible center where there's over 180 different nonprofits, therapy, drug addiction counseling, how to grow your own food, reskilling and so on. And the reason why they're doing this is because when you have somebody who's homeless, a lot of them don't have a house. They don't have money. They have I have to go over here for my therapy. I have to go over here for, to get my EBT card, or I have to go over here to get my, whatever, housing assistance. Well, they can't get to those things, right? So what they've done is created a one-stop shopping for those who are homeless. And they say, okay, you can no longer be on the streets. It's illegal. You can come and you can actually enter. We have low income housing here in the center. You can get all of the wraparound services you need right here. And if you don't want to partake, you don't want the low income housing, then you can take your tent and you can pitch it on the 22 acres around the center.
Okay.
But you have to live there. You can't be on the streets any longer.
Okay. Well, that's very cool. So why don't you tell us how we can help you, how we can connect with you? Tell us maybe some of your website, and your channels. How can we get involved?
Sure. So you can find my website at electreinette.com. That's ELECT, and then Reinette is REINETTE, Reinette.com. And it's really important to Jeff, to let people know that we have been led to believe that it's the general election in November that's the most important. Californians have received their ballots. The primary election is the most important election, and this election in particular is probably the most important election in the history of California. The media is not covering it. They don't want you to know about it. When you look at, historically speaking, in primaries, generally the people who are 80% of the people who agree on 90% of the issues, they don't vote until November. It's the extreme left and right who vote in the primary, and it's the top two vote getters. Does not matter your party affiliation. Top two vote getters. It's the extreme left and right who vote for them. They go to the general election. Here's the people in the middle who are now voting in the general election in November, and wait a second, this is who I have to vote for? I don't identify with these people. Well, guess what? It's in the primary in June that basically you're casting the die, essentially. You're hitting the ball up to the net. So it's really imperative that people vote in the primary. and really look at who it is they're voting for, because the people that you see in the Google ads or on the first page of the Google searches, they're generally backed up by the big money. So it's an illusion of like, oh, you have these options. But what you realize is that they're actually backed up by big corporate money. So you got to go beyond them and look for the other guys who are actually more independent. So primary is important. Go to electronet.com, spread the word to everyone you know. I've been highly, highly censored, as you can well imagine. It's kind of crazy. It gets worse every week. Spread the word about this. I'm no party affiliation. I've got a beautiful 30-page contract with Californians. It's a blueprint for California. I put that out over a year ago. And of course, we always need donations, right? We don't have the big corporate donors. It's literally a grassroots campaign, so I can be true to the people and the planet themselves.
Okay, well, thank you, Reinette, for joining us on this Disaster Preparedness Network podcast that we're doing on connecting with our elected officials, from mayors to governors to all assemblymen to congressmen. And I really appreciate you coming on board. Please check the notes down below. Please like and subscribe this video. And remember to please, the most important thing you can do, vote in the primaries, because that is important. Your vote counts. Your vote is supported in California. We're not going to suppress any votes here. So thank you so much for joining me. We'll see you all later. Please remember to like and subscribe down there. Thank you.